my name's Howard Crowhurst, and I was born in Wales, moved all over Great Britain as a child because my father moved around all over the place. And then when I was 20, I went to live in France. And then about 25 years ago, I moved down to Carnac in Brittany. I've been living there since, and I got interested in the megalithic monuments down there, and I've been studying those for that amount of time.
But from what I saw of your presentation, very intently.
Yeah.
I've had the great good fortune to visit Carnac quite by accident, actually, if you consider there is such a thing, a few years ago, and I knew nothing about it, and so my first exposure to it was synchronous or accidental, and I found it absolutely breathtaking. And to see your presentation today, the one thing that really stood out for me, head and shoulders, that was almost like a literal physical slap in the face, was the discovery of the phi ratio. Can you talk me through that a little bit? I found that extremely interesting.
Well, it's like most of the things I was looking into. I always have the point of view that these people weren't making mistakes, weren't doing things by accident, so that anything that might turn up, if I didn't understand it, it's because I didn't understand it. It's not because it didn't mean anything. So a lot of things I've been sort of keeping in my head for years and trying to say, well, someday maybe. So certain orientations, if I take this phi ratio, which is the orientation of the East Menic cromlech or stone enclosure, that angle, it was not pointing to anything in particular. Sometimes monuments point to one another, there's a relationship, there doesn't seem to be pointing to anything. And it slowly got me to thinking that it meant something by itself, basically. And then by one day I realised that it was bisecting the large angle of a double square. And when I got the calculator out and typed in the thing and saw 0.6180339.
To 50 decimals, I think you said, wasn't it?
Well, as many as you want.
Really?
1,000 if you want.
It's that accurate?
It's exact.
Wow.
It's an exact relationship.
That is astonishing.
Yeah, it's an exact relationship.
It is quite mind-blowing. It is quite mind-blowing, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and all the relationships I've been showing are exact relationships. So if you go on Wikipedia, for example, and you look at irrational number, you look at irrational number, it's an irrational number is a number which has decimals that go on forever. It says, in theory, it's possible to add two irrational numbers together to make a whole number, but there's no known example. Well, now there is a known example. If you take the angle of a double square, 2.656, etc., an irrational number going on to it forever, you add it to the angle of a triple square, 18 point, you get 45 degrees exactly. So that's two irrational numbers when added together, which can be taken to as many decimal places as you want, 100, 1,000, 10,000. When you add them together, you get a whole number. And scientifically, if you go on Wikipedia, that doesn't exist. There's no known example. That's an example. So there are some incredible things that have come out of this study of the megaliths, which show that their science, in fact, went further than ours.
And would you say that's developmental or legacy-oriented? This is ultimately the great question, really, of all ancient cultures, isn't it? Did they develop alone, or were they inheritors of a...
Well, yeah, I mean, this is an incredible question. I don't even know who did it. Were these people? Crop circles appear. Who's doing them? I can't answer that question. I mean, if you look at the archaeological side of it, there is no archaeological evidence of people living in that area. So the actual, from the things they find, like pottery or stuff like that, they work out that the density of population in that area at that time was 0.8 people per square kilometre. In other words, they prefer cutting people up than kilometres. But anyway, so there's less than one person per square kilometre. And then beside that, you have the giant standing stone at Loch Mariaker, which weighed 350 tonnes and came from at least 14 kilometres away. And it's been estimated that that would have needed at least 3,000 men for a long period of time, several months, to get that from its quarry to where it was. So 3,000 men means women, children, etc. So we're talking about, say, a population of 10,000 people. So that would be the total population over an area of something like 12,000 square kilometres that had got together to drag that one stone. Now, of course, that doesn't fit.
No.
But that's the archaeological model. There was 0.8 people per square kilometre, and you needed all these thousands of people. So there's a big problem. There's no dwelling places. There's never been any trace found of somewhere these people may have lived.
So what's, I mean, without wanting to pin you down to something that you don't want to be pinned down to, it, what would be, if you were pushed to an opinion, however fanciful, what would you say is the explanation for that?
Well, I don't know how you'd manage to push me into doing that, because I don't know, really. You see, I don't know.
Daydreams?
I mean,
intuition?
there's one possibility is that there were large amounts of humans and that they were living in the bay because the water levels come up, and there's a massive bay which is 5 metres deep and the water levels come up, so maybe they were all living in the bay and the whole thing was washed away by the sea, and you know, there's no traces of it. You see what a tsunami did in Japan. So there's one possibility, but I don't believe that really, because the traces of dwellings that exist from before that period, the Mesolithic period, there are traces, they're all on the hilltops. And these people obviously weren't living down by the sea.
No.
So why would they have moved down? Well, I don't think, but what we do know is that there are megaliths under that bay. So
really?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, one of the major, I think in the next decade or 20 years, I think one of the major archaeological things that's going to be happening there is that we're going to discover alignments under the sea.
Interesting.
It's going on at the time being. Boats are out there with sonars and stuff. Alignments have already been found on the bottom of the sea floor.
And given, of course, when those sea level changes happened most recently, I mean, we don't have to nail our colours to the mast and say that that's when this was occurring, but the most recent ones that we can date with any degree of certainty, I suppose, is circa 10 to 15,000 BC. Am I right? That's the area that we're looking at for the last major changes in sea levels.
No, I don't think so. No.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, 15,000 to 10,000 BC was an incredible change in sea level. So they reckon that the water has come up for more than 100 metres since then.
Right.
Right. So that meant that before that, the islands and everything were linked to the coast. But if we're talking about the megalithic time, say minus 5,000 BC, they reckon there's about a 7 metre water level change.
Which is enough to make a significant
But nobody
difference.
knows, in fact, if it was sudden or gradual.
Right.
I personally think it was sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another important fact which was discovered last year. There's an island to the south of this place, to the south of the Karnak alignments. There's an island in the sea called Belle-Île.
So this is out beyond Mont Saint-Michel. This is further.
No, this is south coast.
I beg your
South
pardon.
coast.
Okay.
We're on the south coast of Brittany. So it's you have the Karnak alignments. There's the bay called the Bay of Morbihan.
Okay.
And then there's an island called Belle-Île. That island is about well, anyway, what I want to say is that on that island last year was discovered the remains of a massive standing stone which originally weighed about 80 tons,
Wow.
And what's astounding is that that standing stone was in a stone called orthogneiss, and there's no orthogneiss on the island. And the nearest orthogneiss quarry is 35 kilometres by sea away. So this is a fact. On the island is an 80-ton orthogneiss stone, which is not from the island. So it was transported there somehow.
Indeed.
And, you know, what are you talking about? What kind of boats could have existed, and how would you get anything onto the boat? How would you get an 80-ton stone into a boat, get it out on the sea, you know?
And that's the how, before you even begin looking at the why.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah.
Let's just talk for a second. A couple of the people that have I found interested in the works and who come up in conversation a lot are Michael Cremo and his Forbidden Archaeology studies, and also more recently Michael Tellinger and the stuff that he's doing in South Africa. Both these sets of research from these authors are looking at significantly older dates for modern humans being active. Do you think there's room to consider the possibility that one of the reasons perhaps that there isn't evidence of human settlement in the region around Karnak and other sites is because it is significantly older than it's given credit for?
Well, there's evidence. I mean, if we look at the Tumulus Saint Michel, right, this artificial hill I talked about in the talk, it's made from stone, and there's also sea slime. There's a 2-metre thick layer of sea slime which was carried from the bay right up to this hilltop. I mean, we're talking about thousands of tons of sea slime, which is pretty difficult to carry.
Yeah.
So this monument, which is an incredible monument, when it was excavated in 1862 for the first time, fires were found where bones had been burnt, animal bones. And so if you go onto the official French government website and you look at the Tumulus Saint Michel, it says this monument was very rich in animal finds and bone finds. There was cremation and stuff. All that stuff enables you to date it with carbon-14 dating. And then when they come to the dating part, they say, unfortunately, there's too much variation in the dates to be able to give a precise date. Now that is an incredible contradiction. I mean, what we're saying is we've got loads of things we can test, but we can't get a date out of it. And what that actually means is they've probably got dates which are much older than the archaeological present model accepts, so they won't give a date. And I mean, it would be much more polite because we're paying for this, right? You know, well, I pay my taxes in France, so I'm paying for these studies to take place.
So you'd quite like to have a
so
look at the results.
So it would be much more polite if they said, we found this result and that result. This result gave minus 8,500, because I have to have had the information from elsewhere. So one of the carbon-14 dating is minus 8,500.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Very
that's in the Tumulus Saint Michel. So there is actual evidence that the things are much older, which of course links us to Göbekli Tepe, which has been clearly dated at 9,500 BC, and which is a megalithic structure.
Indeed, indeed, and of course there's the
circular.
Very much so. I mean, I was speaking with Andrew Collins recently about this very thing, and it has obvious echoes to the Noah story as well. I mean, it's very evocative of it. You can't help but think of that. But also the dating for me has echoes with the finds in the Bay of Bengal that Graham Hancock was involved in peripherally about this very old civilization from pretty much the same period, if I remember correctly, from again when the sea levels were significantly lower. So we seem to be starting to get little bits of clues, despite it seems the prevailing paradigm's best efforts to maintain the status quo.
Since I've been living in Brittany for 25 years, and since I've been living there, the dates have slowly been pushed back by archaeologists. I mean, they're now saying that the initial standing stones, they've recently found a hole of a standing stone which seems to have disappeared, which has been dated at 6,200 BC, for one of the major massive standing stones. And what's strange is that the biggest stones are the oldest. So we're not in a sort of gradual process, you know. And I get the impression quite clearly that the thing started with massive standing stones that were placed out like tracing things, and then afterwards, over the centuries or whatever, it's like filling in the, you know, the thing was filled in. What I'd say is really, it doesn't really matter, does it, to us, because it's from prehistory. We have absolutely no link. There's a total break with it. There's no legend. There's no... you see, this happened. The stone's there, but there's absolutely no physical link with it, apart from the stones themselves.
And there's no, as you said, there's no legend for the region. The Breton people don't have anything in their culture.
There's no... The oldest things you find is that they've always been there. I mean, there's about giants, but you know, giants but you know, that's probably linked with the fact that, you know, you had to be a giant to move those things around. If you go 200 years back, none of the people at that time were capable in any way of moving stones of that size. So, seeing as the stones were there, well, it meant giants.
It's interesting. And of course, we've got the likes of Stukely in English culture, thankfully, who stepped in and did a great deal to preserve Avebury for us, and in terms of, you know, annotating it and keeping records of it. Is there a French counterpart? Is there anybody who was doing similar work for Karnak?
Well, much more recently. Up till the French Revolution, things were kind of preserved by the seigneur, the lord system. I don't know how to say it in English, but you know, it's the sort of
the feudal thing.
Feudal system, because land didn't belong; it just belonged to the large landowners, and they just left the megalithic sites. They didn't need extra land or whatever. And then when the French Revolution took place, land was handed out. Everybody got their own bit of land, and some people got land with megaliths on it. And that's tricky when you want to do gardening, and also this was very hard stone. The megaliths are very hard stone, so they're perfect for building lintels over doorways or chimneys, or and it's also, this orthogneiss has it's a kind of granite which has a grain to it. Which means you can put it horizontal and it doesn't break in the middle.
Interesting, okay.
So it's perfect for doing cover stones for dolmens, for example, or that's why orthogneiss, I think, was transported, because it's very resistant. It's difficult to break along its axis. So if you go to the town of Locmaria, for example, in Brittany, you see all these wells and chimney breasts and doors all made out of orthogneiss, and there is no orthogneiss in Locmaria. So these are all standing stones which have been reused because it's high quality stone. And I happen to have come across a letter because written in 1870 by the chief of works for the Belle Isle lighthouse, and they were building the Belle Isle lighthouse with the stones from the Erdeven alignments, and the Brits, in fact, Lucas and Dryden, managed to lodge, the English government lodged an official complaint to the French government about the destruction of the megaliths in Brittany.
Wow.
And that then came down on a local level. And so the local sort of county chief or whatever said, you have to stop. You mustn't use the megaliths anymore for building purposes. And so the chief of works for the lighthouse wrote a letter to the préfet, he's called, saying, listen, if this stone is really perfect for building lighthouses, it's very strong, and if we don't use that, we're going to have to go right to the south of Finisterre to find another stone which is as solid as that. He says, not only that, we've already destroyed 3/4 of it, so we might just as well get rid of the rest, then nobody will ever know the difference. And he also says it also helps the local people who want to get rid of these stones because it annoys them for farming, so everybody's happy, And I actually have a copy of that letter, but he didn't manage to change the guys. But basically, what you have to realise is that in Brittany, from about 1810 to about 1880, every day, scores of carts were pulling into the alignments to break up the stones, to carry off the stones, and all the building that was going, all the villages that are built out of stone were all built with stones from the alignments, from the dolmens, from the... and it is estimated today that there's somewhere between 10 and 15% remaining. So what we actually see today, like 3,000 stones in Karnak, there are still over 1,000 stones in the Erdeven alignments. This is about between 10 and 15% of what was there in 1800.
So it was significantly larger then.
Much larger. I mean, there are drawings done. Two English people called Blair and Reynolds went there in 1832 and did some etchings. And they've done an etching of a stone circle made out of standing stone 6 meters high, which has totally disappeared. There's not even any record of it ever having existed. And I've looked into all these things,
It's quite mind-boggling. It really is. Do you have any thoughts on the purpose of Karnak?
Oh yeah, lots. I never stop having thoughts. But the first thing I'd like to say about that is that we are very conditioned about things having utilitarian reasons. When we see something, what's it for? Mm-hmm. That's all part of our society. And the idea of magic, the idea of things which exist because they have to exist and not because they're for something, it's not something we understand at all. Mm-hmm. The sort of need to do something because it has to be there, and not necessarily because it's for something.
The creative imperative, if you like.
Well, no. The idea of man actually being tuned into something and serving a purpose. Okay. But I don't know. I mean, that's just one initial thought. I mean, I get very angry about all this tomb business. People keep saying Gavrin is the tomb of Gavrinis, or the tomb of this and the tomb of that. I don't believe that these tumuluses were tombs in any shape or form. And I don't think Gavrinis, I don't know if you know that monument, a fantastic engraved monument on an island in the Morbihan Gulf, which is perfectly intact and hasn't been touched at all since 3500 BC, with 29 engraved stones in it. It's an incredibly strong, powerful, magical monument, and calling that a tomb, I just think that's crazy. And I was supposed to be interviewed for a thing called Ancient Aliens. And they asked me to talk about the Gavrinis tomb, and I said it's not a tomb at all. I don't think it's a tomb. I said if I had to describe it, I'd say it's a womb with a view. And so she said, "Oh, could you tell me why you don't think it's a tomb?" And then the next question was, in the Gavrinis tomb, and then the third question was, in the Gavrinis tomb, and it's just amazing how the fact that words have been put on things just stops people from thinking. And these words, it's because we have a need to define. And that need to define, in fact, stops research. It stops us looking into. So I try not to say what's it for, because if I do that, then I may stop looking. See what I mean? Although step after step, I'm getting more tuned into what's going on.
Howard Crowhurst, thank you very much indeed.